Officer Darren Miller adjusted his uniform and checked his reflection in the polished surface of his patrol ship's console. 20 years in the Galactic Coalition police force had taught him many things, but one belief remained unchanged. Humans did not belong among the stars. He particularly disliked the older Earth vessels that seemed to crawl through his patrol sector near Jupiter's orbit. Patrol Unit 459, beginning standard monitoring of Checkpoint Alpha. Miller spoke into his communicator, his voice carrying the artificial politeness he reserved for official communications. His superior's voice crackled through the system. Confirmed 459, standard 6-hour patrol. Remember the diplomatic traffic expected today. Miller grunted an acknowledgement. The diplomatic reminder meant important people would be passing through his sector. Important non-human people, he assumed. The Coalition had only admitted Earth 8 years ago, and Miller considered it a mistake. Humans were too unpredictable, too emotional, and too quick to demand equal treatment despite being centuries behind in technological development. His scanner pinged, indicating an approaching vessel. Miller checked the registration. Earth origin, civilian class, older model but still within regulation standards. The perfect target for what his colleagues jokingly called his special inspections. Computer, flag vessel ECV 2089 for routine inspection, Miller said, a small smile forming at the corners of his mouth. The computer confirmed his command with a soft beep as Miller's patrol ship changed course to intercept the Earth vessel. The approaching ship was small and elegant despite its age, painted deep blue with Earth's global unity emblem on its side. It moved precisely within the travel lane, following all regulations perfectly. Miller found this suspicious. In his experience, humans often broke small rules. This careful compliance made him even more determined to find something wrong. Earth, Vessel ECV 2089. This is Galactic Coalition Police Force. Reduce speed and prepare for boarding and inspection, Miller announced over the common channel. He watched as the Earth vessel slowed obediently and extended its docking port. Inside the Earth vessel, Dr. Eleanor Washington sighed as she heard the inspection announcement. At 72 years old, she had experienced too many routine inspections to be surprised. She had hoped her journey from Earth to the Centauri Judicial Station would be smooth, but old habits died hard in frontier checkpoints. Eleanor carefully secured her diplomatic documents in her bag. After 50 years as a respected Earth diplomat and legal scholar, she knew exactly how these encounters typically unfolded. Now, as the first human justice appointed to the Supreme Galactic Tribunal, she understood that her experiences were valuable data points for the cases she would soon help decide. She smoothed down her formal travel suit and touched the silver, judicial insignia pinned to her collar. The small pin contained her official credentials and emergency beacon, standard issue for all 50 justices of the tribunal. Eleanor watched through the view screen as the police vessel attached itself to her ship's airlock. The connecting door slid open with a mechanical hiss. Officer Miller stepped through, his tall, angular form towering in the compact cabin of Eleanor's ship. His species had evolved on a high-gravity world, giving him dense muscle structure and a natural physical advantage over humans. Miller used this to full effect, standing unnecessarily close as he looked down at Eleanor. "Identification and travel permit," he demanded without greeting, his four-fingered hand extended expectantly. Eleanor calmly retrieved her documentation and handed it over. "Good afternoon, officer. My documents are in order. I'm traveling to the Centauri Judicial Station for official business." Miller barely looked at the documents before responding. "These will need detailed verification. Humans often misunderstand Coalition travel regulations." His voice carried a tone of practiced condescension. "What business does an elderly human have at the judicial station?" "I have meetings to attend," Eleanor answered simply. Miller walked around the small cabin running a scanner over various surfaces. Earth vessels this old often have hidden compartments. Smuggling has increased in this sector. "My ship passed. Full inspection at Earth departure," Eleanor noted, her voice steady and calm. "The records are included in my documentation." "Earth inspections are not always thorough by Coalition standards," Miller replied. deliberately placing her documents on a surface just out of her reach. We find that humans frequently misinterpret our regulations. Eleanor watched him carefully. Which regulation do you believe I violated, officer? Miller paused his scanning and turned to her with narrowed eyes. Your drive signature shows unusual patterns. This could indicate illegal modifications. My ship has standard Earth drives recently serviced at the Coalition-approved facility on Luna, Eleanor explained. The certification is included in my documentation. Documentation can be falsified, Miller countered, beginning to open storage compartments without asking permission. I'll need to see your cargo. I carry only personal effects and materials for my meetings, Eleanor said. She remained seated, maintaining her dignity despite Miller's increasingly invasive search. What meetings could be so important? Miller asked skeptically. The judicial station handles high-level coalition legal matters. Humans rarely have business there. Eleanor considered her response carefully. She could reveal her identity immediately, but years of diplomatic work had taught her the value of understanding how systems truly functioned when people believed no one important was watching. My business concerns coalition law, she answered truthfully but incompletely. Miller laughed shortly. Coalition law takes decades to properly understand. Most humans barely grasp the basics. He picked up one of Eleanor's digital document cases. This looks suspicious. Open it. That contains confidential legal materials, Eleanor stated firmly. All materials must be inspected, Miller insisted, his tone growing harder. Earth vessels have been caught transporting restricted information before. Open it now, or I'll be forced to detain you and impound your vessel. Eleanor straightened in her seat. The moment for observation had passed. Officer Miller, according to your identification badge, I must inform you that you are currently interfering with a justice of the Supreme Galactic Tribunal en route to official proceedings. Miller's expression shifted to disbelief, then amusement. A creative claim. Humans aren't appointed to the tribunal. Eleanor calmly touched the silver insignia on her collar. It illuminated in response to her fingerprint, projecting her official credentials into the air between them. The holographic display showed her full title, authorization codes, and the official seal of the tribunal. Impossible to falsify. I am Justice Eleanor Washington of Earth, appointed to the Supreme Galactic Tribunal 3 standard months ago, she stated clearly. And you, Officer Miller, have just provided me with valuable first-hand experience of the checkpoint procedures I'll be reviewing next week. Officer Miller stared at the glowing credentials hovering in the air between them. The holographic seal of the Supreme Galactic Tribunal rotated slowly, its authenticity impossible to deny. His mouth opened and closed several times before he found words. This must be some kind of mistake, he finally managed to say. His voice had lost its commanding edge. There is no mistake, Eleanor replied calmly. I was appointed 3 months ago as the first human justice to serve on the tribunal. My journey today is to attend the opening session of the new judicial cycle. Miller's skin paled to a lighter shade of its natural gray. I was not informed of any tribunal justice passing through this checkpoint. That was intentional, Eleanor said. She deactivated the holographic display with a gentle touch to her insignia pin. The tribunal has received numerous reports about treatment of human travelers in this sector. I chose to travel in a standard civilian vessel to observe normal checkpoint procedures firsthand. Miller straightened his uniform, trying to regain his composure. My inspection was completely standard, Justice Washington. All travelers must follow coalition regulations. Indeed, Eleanor nodded. Yet you began with assumptions about my documentation before examining it. You suggested my Earth inspection certifications were likely falsified. You threatened detention based on a sealed case of legal documents. She paused. Are these truly standard procedures, Officer Miller? Miller's communicator suddenly buzzed, with urgent priority. He glanced down and saw a direct communication request from Captain Peterson, his direct supervisor. Miller's hand trembled slightly as he accepted the call. Officer Miller, came the sharp voice of Captain Peterson. Is Justice Washington aboard the vessel you're currently inspecting? Yes, sir. Miller replied, his voice strained. And was she properly identified to you? Miller glanced at Eleanor, who watched him with calm, steady eyes. Justice Washington has just presented her credentials, sir. Return to your vessel immediately, Captain Peterson ordered. The GCS Liberty will arrive at your location in 20 minutes. Admiral Reeves wishes to personally escort Justice Washington for the remainder of her journey. Understood, sir, Miller said. The communication ended abruptly. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. It seems your superiors are now aware of my presence, Officer Miller. Miller gathered Eleanor's documents quickly and handed them back with noticeably more care than he had shown before. I apologize for any inconvenience, Justice Washington. Had I known of your position, that is precisely why I did not announce it immediately, Eleanor interrupted gently. The true measure of a system is how it treats those perceived to have no power. She paused, studying his face. How many human vessels do you stop in an average patrol shift, Officer Miller? Miller hesitated. I conduct inspections based on risk factors and suspicious behavior. I see, Eleanor said. And what suspicious behavior did my vessel display? Perfect adherence to travel regulations, proper registration, complete documentation? Before Miller could answer, a massive shadow fell across the view screen. A coalition battle cruiser had arrived much faster than the 20 minutes Captain Peterson had mentioned. The GCS Liberty was an impressive sight, its sleek hull stretching over 2 kilometers in length. Miller's communicator buzzed again. This time, an unfamiliar voice spoke. Officer Miller, this is Admiral Samantha Reeves of the GCS Liberty. You will return to your vessel immediately and dock with our ship. Justice Washington will be transported aboard separately. Yes, Admiral, Miller responded automatically. He turned back to Eleanor. I must return to my ship, Justice. Eleanor nodded. Of course, Officer Miller. I believe we will have opportunity to continue our discussion later. Miller moved quickly to the airlock, eager to escape the increasingly uncomfortable situation. As the door closed behind him, Eleanor allowed herself a small sigh. This was precisely why she had insisted on making this journey in a civilian vessel, rather than taking the diplomatic transport offered to her. Aboard his patrol ship, Miller disengaged from Eleanor's vessel and approached the massive battlecruiser. His hands moved automatically through the docking procedures while his mind raced with growing dread. In 20 years of service, he had never directly encountered an admiral, let alone one who had arrived specifically because of his actions. The Liberty's docking bay swallowed his small patrol craft. As the magnetic clamp secured his ship, Miller saw a reception party waiting. Captain Peterson stood rigidly at attention, flanked by 2 security officers. The captain's expression was thunderous. Officer Miller, Peterson said as Miller descended from his ship. You will surrender your weapon and badge immediately. Miller froze. Sir? You are temporarily relieved of duty pending investigation, Peterson continued. Harassing a Supreme Tribunal justice constitutes a serious diplomatic incident. I was conducting a routine inspection, Miller protested. I had no way of knowing. Your patrol records have already been examined, Peterson cut him off. In the past month alone, you have stopped 43 human vessels and only 7 non-human vessels. Every human vessel was subjected to extended inspection regardless of their compliance with regulations. Miller felt cold sweat form on his neck as he handed over his service weapon and badge. I was following security protocols for suspicious vessels. You will explain your interpretation of those protocols to Admiral Reeves, Peterson said. The Admiral has a particular interest in this case. She and Justice Washington have known each other for 15 years. A new voice spoke from behind. Them. Actually, it's closer to 17 years now. They turned to see Admiral Samantha Reeves approaching. Tall for a human, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled into a severe bun, the Admiral carried herself with unmistakable authority. Behind her walked 3 high-ranking coalition officials whom Miller recognized from news broadcasts as members of the Security Council. Officer Darren Miller, Admiral Reeves said, her voice cool and precise. I've reviewed your service record during our approach. 20 years of service, 15 formal complaints regarding treatment of human travelers, all dismissed by your Superiors. She studied him with sharp eyes. Yet no disciplinary actions. Quite remarkable. Miller stood at rigid attention. I have always been cleared of wrongdoing, Admiral. Yes. Reeves nodded. Always cleared by Captain Peterson or his predecessor. That pattern is of great interest to the Security Council. She glanced toward the officers behind her. Especially, given the upcoming tribunal review of enforcement practices in border regions. A small transport shuttle glided into the docking bay. The door opened to reveal Eleanor Washington, still composed and dignified. Admiral Reeves smiled warmly and moved forward to greet her. Ella, Reeves said, using a familiar nickname that made Miller blink in surprise. Always making an entrance. Hardly my intention, Sam, Eleanor replied with a small smile, though I must say this checkpoint provided exactly the data I was hoping to collect. The two women embraced briefly, then turned to face the assembled officers. Miller felt Eleanor's gaze settle on him, not angry, but evaluating, as though he were evidence in a case she was carefully building. Officer Miller, Eleanor said, I believe you have much to contribute to the tribunal's understanding of checkpoint operations. I look forward to our continued discussions. Admiral Reeves led Eleanor and the Security Council members to a private meeting room aboard the Liberty. Officer Miller followed under escort, feeling increasingly like a prisoner rather than a respected member of the coalition police force. The room was large with a view of space through a curved wall of transparent material. Jupiter loomed in the distance, its swirling storms visible even from this far away. Please be seated, Admiral Reeves instructed, gesturing to the chairs around a large oval table. Miller sat stiffly, noticing how the others seemed to naturally arrange themselves with Eleanor at the focal point. For the first time, he began to truly understand the authority this elderly human woman carried. Justice Washington, began one of the Security Council members, a tall being with iridescent skin. We deeply regret this incident. Had we known of your travel plans? Eleanor raised her hand gently. Counselor Nix, I deliberately chose not to announce my route precisely to avoid special treatment. My role on the tribunal requires me to understand the actual experiences of travelers, not a sanitized version prepared for my benefit. Still, another council member said, the treatment you received is troubling. Not for me personally, Eleanor clarified, but indeed troubling for what it reveals about checkpoint operations. She turned her attention to Miller. Officer Miller, I'd like you to explain your inspection selection process. All eyes turned to Miller. He cleared his throat. I select vessels based on security risk factors. And what risk factors did my vessel present? Eleanor asked. Miller shifted uncomfortably. Older Earth vessels are often used for contraband transport. Admiral Reeves tapped a screen in front of her. Interesting. Coalition intelligence reports show that in the past 3 years, only 2% of contraband seizures involved Earth vessels. Meanwhile, Rigelian freighters account for 27%, yet your records show you've inspected only 3 Rigelian vessels this year. Miller felt sweat forming on his brow. The patterns in my sector may differ from overall statistics. They don't, Captain Peterson said flatly. I reviewed the sector data before this meeting. It matches the general statistics almost exactly. Eleanor leaned forward slightly. Officer Miller, I am not here to punish you personally. My concern is understanding whether your actions represent individual bias or systemic issues. Before Miller could respond, the door to the meeting room slid open. A junior officer hurried in and whispered something to Admiral Reeves. Her expression hardened. It seems, the Admiral announced to the room, that our intelligence officers have discovered something relevant. While inspecting Officer Miller's personal communications, they found connections to an organization called Purity First. She looked directly at Miller. Are you familiar with this group, officer? Miller felt the blood drain from his face. It's just a social club, a place for veterans to discuss coalition values. Really? Admiral Reeves pressed a control, and a holographic display appeared above the table. Because their private communications suggest it's an organization dedicated to preserving what they call proper species hierarchy. and preventing humans from gaining influence in the coalition. The display showed messages Miller had exchanged with other members, including several that specifically targeted human travelers for extra scrutiny at checkpoints. Miller stared at the evidence, unable to form a response. Eleanor studied the messages carefully. "How widespread is this organization, Admiral?" "We're still determining that," Reeves replied. "But preliminary evidence suggests members in multiple sectors and several levels of authority." She paused. "Including Captain Peterson." All eyes turned to Peterson, who had gone rigid in his seat. "That's absurd," Peterson sputtered. "I've never heard of this group." Admiral Reeves pressed another control. Peterson's voice filled the room. "Keep the pressure on human vessels. They need to learn their place before they spread further into our territory." Peterson's face contorted with anger and fear. "That recording is taken out of context." "We have the full context," one of the Security Council members said coldly. "Along with evidence that you systematically dismissed complaints against Officer Miller and others who targeted human vessels." Eleanor watched this unfold with a calm but serious expression. After a moment of tense silence, she spoke. "This confirms what many have suspected. The discrimination is not isolated but organized." She turned to Miller. "You believed you were enforcing proper order, didn't you? Protecting the coalition from what you saw as human encroachment?" Miller looked at her, surprised by the lack of anger in her voice. "Humans pushed their way into the coalition before they were ready," he said, deciding honesty was his only option now. "Your species doesn't understand our ways, our history. You demand equal status when you haven't earned it through centuries of contribution like the founding species. And so you took it upon yourself to teach us our place," Eleanor said. "It wasn't a question. Someone had to," Miller replied. "The politicians were too focused on Earth's resources to see the danger." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Thank you for your honesty, Officer Miller. It will be valuable as we address these issues." "What happens now?" Miller asked, looking around the room. "For you," Admiral Reeves said, "formal charges of discrimination, abuse of authority, and participation in a group that undermines coalition unity. For Captain Peterson and any others we identify, similar charges. And for the coalition," Eleanor added, "a necessary examination of how we integrate new species. The Supreme Tribunal's upcoming case will now have concrete evidence of organized discrimination." The meeting continued for another hour as they discussed the implications and next steps. Miller sat in silence, watching as his 20-year career collapsed around him. What surprised him most was not the anger directed at him, but the methodical way Justice Washington approached the situation. She asked detailed questions about Purity First's structure, recruitment methods, and influence. She seemed less interested in punishment than in understanding. As the meeting concluded, Eleanor approached Miller while the others prepared to leave. "Officer Miller," she said quietly, "do you know why Earth was invited to join the coalition 8 years ago?" Miller looked up at her. "For our resources, water, minerals." Eleanor shook her head. "The coalition has access to thousands of resource-rich planets. Earth was invited because of human adaptability. Our species survived and thrived despite countless setbacks. We faced extinction multiple times and always found a way forward." She continued, "The coalition needs that resilience. The older species have become set in their ways, resistant to change. That's why your superiors fear us. Not because we're inferior, but because we represent unavoidable change." Miller frowned. "You can't expect centuries of coalition tradition to change for newcomers." "No," Eleanor agreed, "but I expect it to evolve, as all living things must." She studied him for a moment. "You'll have choices to make in the coming days, Officer Miller. You can cling to the past, or you can help build a more inclusive future." With that, she turned and joined Admiral Reeves at the door, leaving Miller to contemplate how a routine inspection had exposed not just his prejudice, but an entire network of discrimination that reached far beyond his small patrol ship. 6 weeks passed as the investigation into Purity First expanded throughout coalition territory. Officer Miller remained confined to the Liberty, neither fully prisoner nor free. His quarters were comfortable, but constantly monitored. Each day brought more revelations as coalition intelligence uncovered the extent of the organization's reach. Today would be different. Miller had been summoned to observe a preliminary hearing of the Supreme Galactic Tribunal. He adjusted the simple gray civilian clothes he'd been given and waited as two security officers arrived to escort him. "You'll be in a private observation booth," one officer explained as they walked. "Justice Washington requested your presence, specifically." Miller nodded but said nothing. The past weeks had given him much time to think. His certainty about humans and their place in the coalition had begun to crack as he watched the evidence mount against Purity First. The organization he had believed protected coalition values had in fact systematically undermined them. The hearing, chamber aboard the Liberty, was impressive despite being temporary. The tribunal normally met at the Centauri Judicial Station, but given the urgency of this case, they had convened here. 7 justices sat in a semicircle on a raised platform. Eleanor Washington occupied the center position, indicating she was leading this hearing. From his observation booth, Miller could see without being seen. The chamber was filled with officials from various coalition species. Admiral Reeves sat at a side table with several intelligence officers. At the respondents' table sat Captain Peterson and 3 high-ranking officials Miller recognized as Purity First leaders. This preliminary hearing will establish the scope of the case, Humanity versus Coalition Border Authority, Eleanor announced, her voice clear and authoritative. "We will determine whether the discrimination uncovered represents isolated incidents or systemic issues requiring broader remedies." A coalition prosecutor rose. "The evidence demonstrates a coordinated effort to target human vessels and travelers throughout multiple sectors. Communications recovered from Purity First members show explicit instructions to subject humans to excessive scrutiny, delays, and occasionally deliberate mistreatment." Peterson's lawyer countered. "My clients maintain that Purity First is merely a cultural appreciation group concerned with preserving tradition. Any discriminatory actions were the work of a few misguided individuals." Eleanor leaned forward. "The tribunal has reviewed over 6,000 inspection records from the past 3 years. Human vessels were 3 times more likely to be stopped, and 5 times more likely to face extended inspections than any other species' vessels. How do you explain this statistical pattern?" Peterson's lawyer hesitated. "Humans are newer to space travel. Their inexperience may lead to more compliance issues requiring inspection." "Actually," one of the other justices interjected, "the data shows human vessels had fewer actual compliance violations than the coalition average. They were stopped more often despite better compliance." The hearing continued for hours. Miller watched as the case against Purity First solidified. What struck him most was Eleanor's approach. She never showed anger or vindictiveness, only a steady determination to uncover truth. During a recess, Miller's door slid open. Eleanor herself entered, surprising him. "Justice Washington," Miller said, standing quickly. "I didn't expect you personally." "Please sit, Officer Miller," she said, taking a seat across from him. "I wanted to hear your thoughts on the proceedings so far." Miller hesitated. "It's not what I expected. You're not trying to punish Peterson and the others. You're trying to understand the whole system." Eleanor nodded. "Punishment alone doesn't create change. We need to understand how discrimination becomes normalized within institutions." "I've been thinking about what you said," Miller admitted, "about humans being invited to the coalition for their adaptability. And I always saw human unpredictability as a threat," Miller said slowly. "But watching you these past weeks, you don't fit my ideas about humans." Eleanor smiled slightly. "No individual fully represents their species, Officer Miller. That's a basic error in prejudiced thinking." The Purity First leaders claimed humans would undermine coalition values. Miller continued, "But they're the ones who violated our principles of equal treatment under law." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "Fear of change often leads people to betray the very values they claim to protect." She studied him for a moment. The full tribunal case begins next week at Centauri Station. I've arranged for you to testify." Miller looked up sharply. "As a defendant?" "As a witness," Eleanor clarified. "Your perspective as a former Purity First member could be valuable. You saw the organization from the inside, believed in its purpose, and now have seen its reality. Why would you trust me to testify? I tried to detain you. Because you've been watching and thinking," Eleanor said. "I see someone beginning to question his assumptions. That's the first step toward growth." Miller considered this. "What happens after the trial? To me, I mean." "That depends partly on you," Eleanor replied. "The evidence suggests you were a relatively minor participant who never engaged in the more extreme actions of the group. There will be consequences, but also opportunities for rehabilitation." "Rehabilitation," Miller repeated, tasting the word. "You really believe people can change their views?" "I've seen it happen throughout my career," Eleanor said. "Often, prejudice is based on fear and lack of meaningful contact. Once people actually work together, those barriers frequently break down." She stood to leave. "There's a human saying, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Change takes time, Officer Miller. The question is whether you want to be part of that change or resist it." After she left, Miller returned to watching the hearing. Peterson and the other defendants looked increasingly defeated as more evidence was presented. Miller felt a strange sense of detachment watching them. Just weeks ago he had shared their beliefs. Now he saw the fear behind their convictions. That evening, Miller made a decision. He contacted Admiral Reeves and requested a private meeting. When she arrived at his quarters, he took a deep breath. "Admiral, I want to provide complete information about Purity First," he said. "Not just what I know, but my understanding of why members joined and how the organization shaped our thinking. If Justice Washington believes it will help create real change, I want to contribute." Admiral Reeves studied him carefully. "This won't erase the consequences of your actions." "I understand," Miller replied. "But for the first time in my career, I'm starting to see beyond my biases. I've spent 20 years enforcing rules I thought protected the coalition. Now I see I was undermining the very principles I claim to uphold." "Justice Washington seems to think you have potential," Reeves said. "She's a good judge of character, so I'll arrange for a detailed deposition starting tomorrow." As the Admiral left, Miller looked out at the stars visible from his window. The universe seemed vaster, now with more possibilities than he had previously allowed himself to see. The certainty that had guided his career had vanished, replaced by uncomfortable questions about his role in a changing coalition. Yet alongside the discomfort came a strange sense of relief. The burden of maintaining his prejudice had been heavier than he realized. Now, facing the truth, Miller felt the first faint stirrings of hope that he might find a place in this new, more inclusive future that Justice Washington envisioned. The grand chamber of the Supreme Galactic Tribunal at Centauri Judicial Station hummed with tension. 6 months had passed since Officer Miller had stopped Justice Eleanor Washington's ship. In that time, the case had grown from a single incident into the largest investigation of institutional discrimination in coalition history. Today would bring the final judgment. All 50 tribunal justices sat in their formal silver robes, with Eleanor at the center as the case's primary adjudicator. The public viewing areas were filled with representatives from every coalition species. The case had captured attention throughout coalition space. Miller sat in a special witness section. His testimony over the past months had helped expose the full extent of Purity First's influence. The organization had placed members in key positions throughout Border Authority and other agencies, creating an invisible barrier to full human integration into coalition society. The Supreme Galactic Tribunal will now deliver its verdict in the case of Humanity versus Coalition Border Authority, announced the court official. Eleanor rose, her dignified presence commanding the room's attention. Her silver hair caught the light as she looked across the assembled officials, defendants, and observers. "This case began with a routine traffic stop," she began, her voice strong despite her age. "A seemingly minor event that revealed a pattern of discrimination affecting thousands of human travelers. Our investigation uncovered evidence of an organization called Purity First that systematically worked to hinder human integration into coalition society. She continued, "The evidence shows that Border Authority officials targeted human vessels for additional scrutiny without legitimate security justifications. Communications between Purity First members explicitly discussed making travel difficult for humans to discourage our participation in coalition affairs." Eleanor gestured to a large display showing statistical analysis. Human vessels were subjected to extended inspections at 3 times the rate of other species, despite having fewer actual violations. Human travelers reported harassment, delays, and intimidation at checkpoints throughout coalition space. She turned her attention to the defendants section, where Captain Peterson and 37 other high-ranking Purity First members sat. The defendants claimed they were protecting coalition culture and traditions, but the coalition's foundational principles include equal treatment under law and respect for the dignity of all sentient beings. Eleanor paused, making eye contact with Miller briefly before continuing. "This case is not about punishing individuals alone. It is about acknowledging systemic problems and creating meaningful change. After careful deliberation, this tribunal has reached unanimous decisions on both findings and remedies." The chamber grew even quieter as Eleanor read the verdict. "We find that the Coalition Border Authority engaged in systematic discrimination against human travelers. We find that the organization Purity First constitutes an illegal conspiracy to undermine coalition unity and equal treatment principles." She continued with the remedies. "All identified members of Purity First holding official positions will be removed from those roles. Border Authority will implement new oversight mechanisms with multi-species observation teams at all checkpoints. All officers will undergo mandatory training on cross-species communication and coalition principles of equality." Miller listened carefully as she addressed rehabilitation. "Those who participated in discriminatory practices but demonstrate willingness to change may enter a rehabilitation program rather than face permanent removal. This program will include working directly with humans and other species they previously discriminated against." Eleanor looked toward Miller again. "Some former Purity First members have already begun this journey. Their cooperation and willingness to confront their prejudices offer hope that meaningful change is possible." The final portion of the verdict addressed broader coalition policies. Additionally, the tribunal recommends a comprehensive review of integration practices for all new species. The evidence suggests humans are not the only group facing systemic barriers, merely the most recent to challenge them successfully. Eleanor concluded with words that resonated throughout the chamber. "The coalition was formed to bring diverse species together in common purpose. Our differences are not weaknesses to be suppressed but strengths to be embraced. Today's judgment reaffirms that principle and challenges us to live up to our highest ideals." As the session ended, Miller found himself approached by Admiral Reeves. "Your rehabilitation assignment has been determined," she informed him. "You'll work as a liaison officer helping human travelers navigate coalition procedures. Essentially, you'll undo the damage Purity First caused by making the system more accessible, not less." Miller nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. "It's appropriate. I spent years making things harder for humans. Now I can make them easier. Justice Washington specifically requested this assignment for you," Reeves added. "She believes your perspective will be valuable." Later that day, Miller received an unexpected summons to Justice Washington's chambers. He found her reviewing documents, her formal robes replaced by simpler attire. "Officer Miller," she greeted him. "Or should I say Liaison Miller now?" "Just Miller is fine," he replied. "I'm not sure I deserve any title yet." Eleanor gestured for him to sit. "Admiral Reeves told you about your assignment?" "Yes. Working with human travelers. It feels right somehow." "Good." Eleanor nodded. "The purpose of justice isn't punishment but restoration. The goal is healing both for those who were harmed and those who caused harm." Miller looked at her curiously. "May I ask you something?" Justice Washington? Of course. You never seemed angry even when I treated you disrespectfully. How did you maintain that composure? Eleanor smiled slightly. I've spent my life working for change. I learned long ago that anger, while natural and sometimes necessary, can be an obstacle when trying to build bridges. I needed to understand you and others like you, not just condemn you. I'm still trying to understand how I became part of Purity First, Miller admitted. I joined the Border Authority to protect people. Somehow that became protecting against people. Fear often disguises itself as righteousness, Eleanor observed. The first coalition species feared losing their dominance as new members joined. Each new addition threatens the established order in some way. And humans threatened it more than most, Miller said. Perhaps, Eleanor agreed. We adapt quickly, ask difficult questions, challenge traditions. These qualities make us valuable but also disruptive. She paused. The irony is that by trying to suppress these qualities, Purity First accelerated the very changes they feared. Miller considered this. If they had simply accepted humans as equals, the integration would have been slower, more natural. Exactly. Resistance often strengthens what it opposes. A month later, Miller stood at his new post at the same Jupiter checkpoint where he had stopped Eleanor's ship. Now, instead of intimidating human travelers, he helped them understand coalition procedures and ensured they received fair treatment. Each day brought new challenges as he confronted his lingering biases and worked to overcome them. The process wasn't easy or comfortable, but it felt meaningful in a way his previous work never had. As a small civilian transport approached the checkpoint, Miller prepared to greet its passengers. The identification showed an elderly human woman, traveling alone. When the airlock opened, he was surprised to see Justice Eleanor Washington step through. Justice Washington, he said, I didn't expect to see you here again. I make this journey regularly now, she explained. Part of our new oversight process is having tribunal representatives experience checkpoints firsthand. Miller nodded. Everything is in order for your journey, Justice. Thank you, Miller, she said with a small smile. I'm pleased to see you at this post. How are you finding your new role? Challenging, he admitted, but rewarding. I'm learning something new every day. He hesitated, then added, Thank you for giving me this opportunity. You earned it by choosing to change, Eleanor replied. That's often the hardest first step. She studied the checkpoint area, noting the diverse species now staffing it. The coalition is changing too, slowly perhaps, but meaningfully. As she continued on her journey, Miller returned to his duties with renewed purpose. The coalition's future would be different from its past, more inclusive and diverse. And for the first time, he looked forward to being part of that future rather than fighting against it. The universe was vast and full of differences. Learning to embrace those differences rather than fear them would be a lifelong journey. For Miller, for the coalition, and for all who sought to find unity without demanding uniformity.